January 1863. Virginia mud stretches for miles in every direction. Rain hammers down on thousands of Union soldiers, stuck, miserable, going nowhere. Then something catches the attention of one officer. Across the Rappahannock River, a Confederate soldier holds up a hand-painted sign. The words are clear even from a distance. Burnside and his pontoons stuck in the mud. Move at 1 o'clock. 3 days' rations in haversacks. Every detail, every movement. The enemy knew everything. That Union officer staring at the sign was Colonel George Sharpe. What he witnessed that day would haunt him because it exposed a brutal truth. The Confederates knew more about the Union Army than the Union knew about itself. But here's where the story gets interesting. That same officer who saw that humiliating sign would become the man who fixed everything. He'd create America's first modern spy network, revolutionize military intelligence, and change the outcome of the war. Yet his name barely appears in history books. This is the story of the spy who saved the Union and the incredible network that operated in the shadows of the Confederate capital. The disaster Sharpe witnessed wasn't just embarrassing, it was deadly. General Ambrose Burnside had already led the Army of the Potomac to a catastrophic defeat at Fredericksburg just weeks earlier. Thousands of Union soldiers died charging uphill into Confederate positions, wave after wave, accomplishing nothing except filling the field with bodies. Now Burnside tried to redeem himself with a flanking maneuver around Robert E. Lee's army. The plan failed before it even started. 4 days of torrential rain turned Virginia roads into rivers of mud. Wagons sank up to their axles. Artillery pieces disappeared into the muck. Soldiers abandoned equipment just to keep moving. The Confederates across the river didn't even have to fight. They just watched and laughed and held up signs mocking the Union's every move. The message was clear. We know what you're doing before you do it. Morale collapsed. Men deserted by the hundreds. Officers openly questioned whether the war could even be won. President Lincoln had seen enough. Burnside was done. In came Major General Joseph Hooker, and Hooker knew he had a bigger problem than just rebuilding an army. He needed to rebuild the entire intelligence operation from scratch. For 2 years, the Union had relied on one man for intelligence, Allan Pinkerton. If you've heard the name, you probably know him as America's first great detective. Before the war, Pinkerton built a reputation catching train robbers and busting counterfeiting rings. He even claimed to have stopped an assassination plot against President Lincoln before the inauguration. So when General George McClellan needed a spy master for the Army of the Potomac, Pinkerton seemed like the obvious choice. Seemed like. What followed was one of the most spectacular intelligence failures in American history. Pinkerton's methods were simple. Interrogate prisoners, talk to deserters, send agents behind enemy lines, report back. The problem wasn't the methods. The problem was what Pinkerton did with the information. He doubled it, sometimes tripled it. Take the spring of 1862. The Confederate Army defending Yorktown, Virginia numbered about 17,000 men. Pinkerton told McClellan there were 120,000. At Manassas, 50,000 Confederates became 150,000 in Pinkerton's reports. The pattern repeated everywhere. McClellan, already cautious by nature, became paralyzed. He refused to attack. He demanded more troops. He built elaborate siege works when he could have just advanced and won. Some historians suggest Pinkerton wasn't incompetent. They say he was dishonest. Evidence suggests he and McClellan conspired to inflate the numbers deliberately. In one letter, Pinkerton admitted his estimate was made large so as to be sure to cover the entire number of the enemy. They cooked the books together. The consequences were devastating. At the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, McClellan had Lee's entire battle plan. A Confederate officer had dropped it, and a Union soldier found it wrapped around 3 cigars. McClellan knew exactly where Lee would position his troops. He had superior numbers, he had every advantage, and he still only managed a draw. The bloodiest single day in American history, over 23,000 casualties, and McClellan couldn't finish Lee's army because he believed he was outnumbered. He wasn't. He had nearly twice as many men as Lee. But Pinkerton's inflated estimates had convinced him otherwise. After Antietam, Lincoln finally removed McClellan from command. Pinkerton left with him. The Union was blind again. When Hooker took over in January 1863, he appointed Colonel George Sharpe as his chief of intelligence in February. Sharpe wasn't your typical military officer. He was 34 years old, a lawyer by training, had studied at elite schools, spoke multiple languages. He'd raised his own regiment, the 120th New York, using his family's money and influence. He loved that regiment. He didn't want to leave. But Hooker convinced him that this new position mattered more. Sharpe threw himself into the work with an intensity that shocked everyone around him. Within weeks, he'd created something the Union Army had never seen before, the Bureau of Military Information. He only had about 70 people on his full-time payroll. No massive budget, no advanced technology, just organization, analysis, and a completely different approach to intelligence gathering. Sharpe didn't just collect information. He cross-referenced it. He verified it. He turned raw data into actionable intelligence. His team interrogated prisoners systematically, looking for patterns in their answers. They intercepted Confederate mail and newspapers. They placed observers in signal towers and sent up reconnaissance balloons. They recruited civilian scouts who knew the terrain. And here's where Sharpe did something revolutionary. He used freed slaves and African Americans as spies. They could move through Confederate territory without attracting suspicion. White Southerners barely noticed them. It was the perfect cover. John Babcock, who'd worked briefly under Pinkerton, became Sharpe's second in command. Babcock was an expert in order of battle, the careful tracking of enemy units, their locations, their strength, their movements. Together, Sharpe and Babcock built detailed charts showing every Confederate brigade, every regiment they could identify. The intelligence started flowing into Hooker's headquarters almost immediately. Not wild guesses, not inflated estimates, actual verified information about Lee's army. But Sharpe's most valuable asset wasn't in the field. It was inside the Confederate capital itself. Her name was Elizabeth Van Lew. Richmond society knew her as the eccentric daughter of a wealthy hardware merchant. She'd been educated in Philadelphia at a Quaker school, came home an abolitionist, freed her family's slaves after her father died. When the war started, she visited Union prisoners at Libby Prison, bringing them food, clothing, books. Everyone thought she was just performing acts of Christian charity. She was doing much more than that. Van Lew was running an entire spy network from her mansion on Church Hill. She used invisible ink made from colorless solution that only appeared when milk was applied. She hid messages in the soles of shoes, in baskets of eggs, in the hollow handles of farming tools. She recruited clerks from Confederate War and Navy departments. She coordinated with escaped prisoners. She employed codes and ciphers. And according to reports that surfaced after the war, she placed a former slave named Mary Bowser as a servant in Jefferson Davis's Confederate White House. Mary Bowser, also known as Mary Jane Richards, had been enslaved by Van Lew's family as a child. Elizabeth sent her north to be educated, then to Liberia as a missionary. When Mary returned to Richmond just before the war, she was arrested. It was illegal for someone to return to a slave state after living free. Van Lew bailed her out and brought her into the spy ring. The details are murky, carefully hidden, even a century and a half later. But multiple sources confirm that Bowser worked as a servant for Jefferson Davis's family. She cleaned, she cooked, she brought dresses to the seamstress, and she had a photographic memory. Davis never suspected. Why would he? To him, she was just another servant, probably illiterate, certainly no threat. He left important documents on his desk in plain view. Bowser would read them, memorize them, and pass the information to Van Lew. Confederate President Jefferson Davis knew there was a leak. He could see it in how well Union forces anticipated his movements. He suspected a mole somewhere in his government. He had no idea the mole was serving him dinner. Van Lew's network sent a steady stream of intelligence northward. Reports on troop movements, details about supply shipments, information about reinforcements moving between Petersburg and Richmond, plans for offensive operations. After the war, General Ulysses S. Grant told Van Lew directly, "You have sent me the most valuable information received from Richmond during the war." June 1863. Lee's army was moving north into Pennsylvania. Sharpe's Bureau of Military Information had only existed for 4 months, but it was about to face its greatest test. Between June 24th and July 1st, Sharpe received over 100 reports about Confederate movements. 75% of them were accurate. His scouts tracked Lee's army as it crossed the Potomac. His interrogators questioned every prisoner, every deserter, piecing together the puzzle of Lee's strength and intentions. By June 30th, Sharpe had enough intelligence to tell the new Union commander, Major General George Meade, exactly where to position his forces. Meade concentrated his army near a small town called Gettysburg. The battle began July 1st. 2 days of brutal fighting followed. The Confederates attacked from the north, then the south. They tried to break the Union left flank at Little Round Top. They assaulted the center at Cemetery Ridge. Every attack was repulsed, but barely. By the evening of July 2nd, Meade faced a critical decision. His army had taken massive casualties. His generals were exhausted. Lee still had fight left in him. Should Meade retreat, pull back to better defensive positions, or stay and risk everything on a third day of battle? Meade called a council of war. His corps commanders debated late into the night. Then Sharpe's assistant, John Babcock, presented his analysis. Babcock had interrogated 1,360 Confederate prisoners taken that day and the day before. He'd carefully tracked which units they came from, which regiments, which brigades. His findings were startling. Prisoners had been captured from nearly 100 different Confederate regiments, representing every single one of Lee's brigades except 4. Those 4 brigades belonged to Major General George Pickett's division, which was still coming up from the rear. The implications were massive. Lee had already committed almost his entire army. He had no fresh troops left except Pickett's division, about 15,000 men. If Meade stayed and fought, Lee couldn't bring any new force to bear. The intelligence was solid. Meade decided to stay. The next day, July 3rd, Lee ordered Pickett's charge. 15,000 Confederate soldiers marched across open ground toward the center of the Union line. Artillery and rifle fire cut them down in waves. The few who reached the Union position were quickly overwhelmed. The charge failed. Lee's army was broken. Gettysburg became the turning point of the war. And it happened because Sharpe's intelligence gave Meade the confidence to stay and fight. After Gettysburg, Sharpe's reputation soared. When Ulysses S. Grant took command of all Union armies in March 1864, he immediately recognized Sharpe's value. Grant made him his personal intelligence chief. Sharpe coordinated intelligence gathering across multiple Union armies. He placed liaison officers with other commands. He ensured information flowed smoothly from Richmond, from the Shenandoah Valley, from Petersburg. During the Overland Campaign from May to June 1864, Sharpe's network tracked Lee's every move. Grant could anticipate Confederate reinforcements. He knew when units shifted from one position to another. In July, Sharpe's intelligence discovered that Confederate General Jubal Early had left the Petersburg defenses and marched toward Washington. Grant immediately sent troops to protect the capital. The Bureau caught everything. When Grant laid siege to Petersburg in June 1864, Sharpe's intelligence network infiltrated the city completely. Van Lew's spies sent daily reports. Sharpe had scouts disguised as Confederate prisoners walking among actual prisoners to verify information. His order of battle estimates became so precise that at Appomattox, when Lee finally surrendered in April 1865, Grant used Sharpe's figures to allocate food for the starving Confederate soldiers. Sharpe's estimate was off by only 4%, despite weeks of constant personnel changes. 4%. After 2 years of Pinkerton being off by 100% or more, Sharpe had refined intelligence gathering to near perfection. Then the war ended, and something inexplicable happened. The Union Army immediately disbanded the Bureau of Military Information, completely. Sharpe's entire organization was dissolved within weeks. All that expertise, all those methods, all those successes, just thrown away. It would be 20 years before the Army even considered creating another intelligence organization. 20 years. Sharpe was promoted to brevet major general, left military service, and went back to practicing law. He got involved in New York Republican politics. He served as a U.S. Marshal. He investigated potential Lincoln assassination conspirators in Europe for the State Department. He was elected to the New York State Assembly and served as Speaker for 2 years. His obituary barely mentioned his intelligence work. The Bureau of Military Information became a footnote, an obscure detail in Civil War history. Elizabeth Van Lew fared even worse. After the war, Grant appointed her postmaster of Richmond. She served for 8 years, but she'd spent her entire fortune on intelligence operations during the war. She'd paid spies. She'd bribed Confederate officials. She'd funded escapes for Union prisoners. By the time she died in 1900, she was poor. Richmond society shunned her as a traitor. She died alone and nearly forgotten. Her neighbors hated her so much that after her death, they tried to destroy her grave marker. She'd sacrificed everything for the Union, and the Union barely remembered her name. Mary Bowser's fate remains mostly unknown. After the war, she worked as a teacher for the Freedmen's Bureau. She gave speeches in New York in September 1865 under the alias Richmonia Richards. Then she disappeared from the historical record. Her incredible work inside the Confederate White House remained hidden for decades. It took until the late 20th century for historians and intelligence professionals to fully appreciate what Sharpe accomplished. The CIA eventually credited him with creating the first all-source intelligence organization in U.S. history. Modern intelligence agencies trace their methods directly back to Sharpe's bureau, cross-referencing multiple sources, systematic interrogation, order of battle analysis, coordination across different intelligence disciplines. Sharpe did in 1863 what intelligence agencies wouldn't replicate again until World War I. Here's the ultimate irony. The officer who saw that Confederate sign mocking Union intelligence during the Mud March became the man who fixed it. The lawyer with no formal intelligence training created a system that professional spy masters couldn't match for 50 years. The wealthy Richmond socialite and the formerly enslaved woman with a photographic memory ran circles around the entire Confederate government, and they did it all in the shadows. Their work was so secret that even their own side barely acknowledged it. There's something deeply frustrating about brilliant work done in darkness. Sharpe, Van Lew, Bowser, they changed history. They gave the Union the intelligence advantage that helped end the war. They proved that proper analysis mattered more than daring spy missions. They showed that systematic information gathering could overcome even the most brilliant battlefield commanders. Yet they received almost no recognition for it during their lifetimes. The parallels to modern intelligence failures are impossible to ignore. The September 11th attacks happened partly because different intelligence agencies didn't share information. The Iraq War was launched based on incorrect intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. Over and over, we see the same problem Sharpe solved in 1863. Failure to coordinate multiple intelligence sources, and failure to verify information, failure to present accurate analysis to decision makers. The lesson from the Civil War is simple. Intelligence isn't about having the most spies or the most advanced technology. It's about taking information from every available source, verifying it carefully, analyzing it systematically, and presenting it clearly to the people who need to make decisions. Sharpe understood that in 1863. We're still learning it today. The spy who changed the Civil War remains one of history's most unknown heroes. He saw the Union's greatest intelligence failure with his own eyes. He fixed it. He created something revolutionary. Then he watched it all get dismantled the moment the war ended. That's the price of working in the shadows. Your victories are invisible. Your failures are public. Your greatest achievements disappear with you. But the work matters. It always has. It always will. George Sharpe proved that. Elizabeth Van Lew proved that. Mary Bowser proved that. They operated in darkness so others could fight in the light. And they changed everything.